All right, Deepa.
Okay, thanks, Nora. Hello, everybody. How are you? I hope you're all well on this Thursday morning. Without delaying any longer, I'll just quickly mention that we're going to be talking about thesis, capstone, and practicum today, kind of demystifying the processes. The track directors, Bernardo Hernandez-Prado, will be talking about thesis, and Steve Gloyd will be talking a bit about capstone and distinguishing it from thesis and practicum. And as you probably know, Steve is the Associate Director of the MPH program in Global Health, and I'm the Director. So it's nice that you've been able to join us. We're going to try and have quite a bit of time left over for you to ask questions. So without further delay, I'll give the floor to Steve, who will start us off.
Hey, thanks, Deepa. Thanks for setting all this up. Why don't we go to the second slide? And my job right now is to just give you less than 5 minutes about what is the difference between a thesis, a capstone, and a practicum. And so this is a sheet that you have available to you, which defines the APE, the practicum, and the thesis. It's a bit wordy. The words are important to read, but let's go to the next slide because I've taken most of the words out just to simplify it so that it becomes, I think, a little clearer of what is a practicum, which is the applied practical experience, which is the terminology of the national level CEPH, or the Council on Education and Public Health, which requires a practicum for a public health degree. And the integrated learning experience, also called the ILE, which includes both a capstone and a thesis. So everybody who, in order to graduate with an MPH at any MPH accredited school in the United States, has to have both an APE, that is a practicum, and an ILE, which is either a capstone or a thesis. Okay, you don't do a capstone and a thesis, but you do a practicum and a capstone, or a practicum and a thesis. So what's the difference? Well, the practicum is the experience with an organization. It's part of the activity is to contribute to the organization, and you have some deliverables for the organization. But the main issue of the practicum is to be there physically in the non-COVID years, less so in COVID years. So I think in your group, you know, it should be the first year students. We hope that a lot of you will physically be in organizations. The minimum is 160 hours for a practicum, which includes both being in the organization, which is generally half of that, and the work that you do that could be on a computer or whatever. The capstone and a thesis are both products, okay? And they're big products that take a lot longer. The capstone is a product to solve a public health problem working within an organization. So it's specific generally to that organization. Whereas a thesis is a study which is generalizable that focuses on applying your methods. In both cases, you apply the skills and methods and values you learn in the public health school, but a thesis is generalizable, generally publishable. And so the purpose of the practicum is to apply the skills that you learn in the classroom to the organization, which could be a nonprofit, a for-profit, health department, et cetera. The purpose of the capstone and the thesis is to synthesize your skills and the competencies for this product, both of which should be analytic, but one, the capstone is, again, focused on the organization's needs, and the thesis is focused on generalizable information. The outputs are that for a practicum, you need 2 site products. For the capstone or a thesis, they're both high quality products, but the product for the capstone is not intended to be publishable or generalizable, whereas the thesis is, even though, plenty of theses don't end up getting published, but the idea is that this should be generalizable and useful for the public health audience. The evaluation is quite different between the practicum and the capstone thesis. The evaluation is the practicum is with your faculty advisor, as well as with a site advisor. And there are a bunch of products that you will learn as you go through the practicum that you have to do, which includes your own sort of reflection, a midpoint review, a final evaluation, et cetera. Whereas this capstone and the thesis, you have a committee, a chair, and a committee member or members, and they evaluate the quality of the final products and give you the grade. Usually, pass, fail generally. The timing is that the practicum you do after the completion of a quarter of your MPH coursework. So it's nobody should be starting a practicum now who's in the first year. You should be starting them December, January at the earliest, and most people start later. For the capstone and thesis, generally speaking, we kind of expect you to think about this throughout the year, and by the end of spring quarter, you'll have, most students will have a proposal for a capstone and a thesis by that time. But the timing varies a lot in the capstones and the thesis, as does, the practicum. Number of credits for the practicum is 4 to 6, which is comparable to this 160 hours we talked about. For the thesis and the practicum, it has to be at least 9 credits. You take specific thesis credits or practicum credits. It's generally 30 hours of credit, so you can sort of think that it's 2 hours minimum. Generally speaking, we think about a quarter's worth of work and sometimes more. And then you, each one has competencies involved. And the competencies, you have to have 5 competencies that you pick out of the 22 MPH foundational competencies that are put out by the CEPH. And in the case of either the capstone or the thesis, you need to have 2 competencies, one of which is foundational. Sorry, this slide seems to have cut out some stuff. You need 2 competencies. One is of a foundational competency, and then the second one is a competency that comes from the department. And we have, I think, 5 of those competencies that you could pick from. Okay, so that's the difference. And again, everybody has to do both a practicum and then either a thesis or a capstone. And Deepa made a couple of comments in the chat, which, one of which is, of course, you can publish anything, including you can publish a capstone as sort of a case study, but it's generally, it's a case study as opposed to something that's designed to be generalizable. So I will stop there and turn it over to Bernardo, who will talk about the thesis. Although if there are any questions at this point, just about, understanding the difference between the 3, it might be worthwhile to entertain them. I don't know what you think. We have time.
I think it might be better to have the questions all at the end.
That's fine.
Yeah, just for.
Okay.
But they're putting the, Andreas, thank you for inviting the students to put their questions in the chat, but I don't see anything yet.
Okay. So I hope this clarifies the sort of overall differences. And then we'll talk about, okay, how do you do, particularly the thesis and the capstone? Bernardo.
Thank you very much, Steve. So hello, everybody. I'm going to talk mainly about what is the thesis process and what Steve described. Then I will pass to Deepa, who will talk a little bit about the timeline for this, and then we will come back to Steve to hear more about the capstone. For the health metrics and evaluation track guys who are with us, especially those second years, the material on the thesis, you may have heard a bit of this, but anyway, the one of the capstone, it's fairly new, so we really encourage you to remain with us. No? What we would like to do about the thesis is first to review the thesis process, talk about the timeline, and make a bit of advertisement of the manual of thesis in the Canvas. If we can see the next slide, please, Nora. So what are the steps for the thesis completion? Well, overall, first you have to start by defining a thesis topic. We will talk in detail about each one of these, but you start with the definition of a thesis topic. Then you have to put together a thesis committee. You have to select the competencies that are going to be met with your thesis, as Steve described. You have to write a thesis proposal, which is a short document describing what are going to be the methods, the objectives, and the scope of the thesis. Get an IRB review if required. And finally, move on to the thesis presentation and the grading of the final thesis document. So let's go over each one of these steps briefly. If we can see the next one, please. The thesis topic, maybe this is the most difficult part. And once you define what are you going to do for thesis, your life is going to change definitely. According to the MPH Thesis Manual, a thesis is defined as an original research study that uses rigorous methods that are appropriate to the research questions, generates new knowledge, applies concepts and methods from disciplines relevant to public health, and is presented in the scholarly format. So pretty much it has to be a contribution to the field. It's something new, and it's your chance to put together all the pieces of learning that you have go over your master's program. No? So it's a very integrative experience. No? You demonstrate your capacity and your comprehensive knowledge of the field and the use of methods. And it's going to be really where you learn a lot doing this thesis. If we can see the next one. I mean, just recapping, you show your mastering on public health methods. It's a contribution to the literature. That's why a literature review is not acceptable as a thesis. It has to be a study where you like generate something new. It could be a literature review, for example, if you use a specific methodology that it's innovative to integrate information, but just as a literature review, I don't remember any cases of thesis in our program. It can be related to your previous work or not. Some people like to look for something totally new, like to get some fresh air. Some people try to build on their experience. It is totally up to you, the selection of your thesis topic. And the next one, please. How to define your thesis topic? Well, some issues to consider. It has to be something interesting. You will be working on this for months, if not for over a year, so you have to like it. If you build on your expertise, it's a plus. You have to consider the feasibility of your project. If your data are going to be available, if you're going to collect data, if it's feasible to collect the data, if you have the resources, if you have the time, if you can put together a good group of collaborators, make it something that can be done. Remember that the best thesis is the done thesis. So keep it landed. And it doesn't hurt to think in a couple of possible topics and then define a final one. But so if something goes wrong, you may always have a plan B behind. Next one, please. How you have to put, once you define your topic, at least you have like a general idea of the area that you want to address in your thesis. The next step is to put together your thesis committee. And here there are several like restrictions that we have to observe in the composition of the thesis committee. These are important, so keep them an eye. First, the thesis chair must be a UW faculty member with graduate faculty status. And here we can help you, your program manager programs can also help you to identify who has graduate faculty status. Most of the faculty does, but it's good to validate that. The committee chair must have an appointment in the Department of Global Health, the Department of Health Metric Sciences, or the School of Public Health. Exceptions must be approved by the MPH director before a student begins working on the thesis. So if the person that you are approaching to be your thesis director has an appointment in Global Health, Health Metrics, or the School of Public Health, you're good. Otherwise, let us know to do what is necessary. If the committee has 2 members, both members must be UW faculty. If the committee has 3 to 4 members, the committee chair and at least half of the total membership of the committee must have graduate faculty status. Additional non-UW individuals may be committee members if approved in advance by the committee chair. We usually recommend that at least one committee member have sat on a Department of Global Health MPH Thesis Committee previously. It really helps to have someone with experience, although it's not mandatory, but it's a strong recommendation to ensure that faculty expectations of students' work are in line with a master's level thesis and do not overburden the student. So keep an eye on this. We usually recommend to have 2 to 3 members. You don't want to make your committee too big. If necessary, it's okay, but try to keep it small. But the majority of members must be from UW, must be graduate faculty status. If we can see the next one. You can keep this for your records, but this is like a summary of what I talked, so I'd rather skip it for the sake of time. The next one, please. Now, how to integrate your thesis committee, now that you are aware of these parameters of who should be there. Well, it's a good idea to start defining the topic and identifying a person who can serve as the chair of your committee. The chair is going to be the person who can be your main guidance in the process of the thesis. And after you define the chair and you define the topic, then you can start adding committee members, inviting committee members who can help in specific parts of the work. Let's say the statistical analysis, substantive issues. Think of you are trying to put together a soccer team. You need someone to play as the goalkeeper. You need someone who is in defense, good in defense, to play in the defense. You need someone tall and fast to play as forward. So you need different capacities in your committee. So you may want to try to have a balanced team and define other members jointly with the chair. Do not feel shy to approach faculty. For us as faculty, it's part of our job, but it's also good to have students in which we are committee members. So approach as many faculty as you like, learn about their work. You can have like a shopping period in which you go and talk with faculty without making any commitment, just to learn about their work, to try to refine your thesis topic. And then, depending on what you want to do, you may invite some of them to be part of your committee. If you want to approach someone and you have problems contacting any faculty, let us know, and we're happy to facilitate the communication there. The next one, please. Once you have defined your topic and your thesis committee, the next step is to put together a thesis proposal. This is a short document, and the general proposal should include just the objectives, the methods, the competencies that are going to be addressed. It's a brief document following the format in the Department of Global Health. In a way, it serves as a contract between the student and the program. You have to do what is proposed to do in the proposal, but on the other way, it serves you as an insurance that your committee should not ask you to do way more to what is proposed, included in the proposal. So you have to be like loyal to your proposal and stick to it. The proposal must be approved by the committee chair and members before you start doing your thesis work. And the approved proposals have to be uploaded by the student to a Dropbox that we have for this sake. And next one. This is the structure of the thesis proposal that is included in the thesis manual. And as you can see, it's a short document. We rather you dedicate your time from you to do your thesis than to dedicate a lot of time doing your proposal. So it has to be something brief. Typically 3 to 5 pages plus tables and figures, including a title page, the specific aims, 1 or 2 pages on the background and significance of your work, 2 to 3 pages on your methods. And here it helps to be a bit more detailed, so you define what you are going to do. Talk about the limitations, the timeline, which is very important, the budget, if it is relevant, and the references. Next one, please. Now, about IRB review, the graduate school requires all graduate degree students to discuss human subjects requirements with their thesis chair, and they file a use of human and animal subjects for use of graduate students' thesis and dissertations form with their staff advisors. So this is something that you really have to consider. The Department of Global Health MPH program requires human subjects training to be completed prior to the beginning thesis work, and a human subjects application for exception request with the UW Human Subjects Division in conjunction with the student's thesis. What is very important here is to make sure that if your project requires or not a special IRB review. Typically, it happens if you're going to collect some data. If you're working with data that are already collected, you may not need an IRB review, but you have to make sure that you have authorization to use that data and that you have access to the data. And this data have been obtained using the properly IRB review. If we can see the next one. So the reviews required when primary data are collected. It takes time, so prepare in advance. It's not something that you can get done in a week. If the thesis is derived from a secondary analysis, make sure that the project had an IRB review and approval, and also make sure that databases are either public or you have consent to use the information. The next one, please. And well, after you have your proposal, you get the approval from your committee, you upload it to the Dropbox, and it's time to start working on your thesis. So there's going to be some months in which you work on your thesis, and then it's going to be the final part in which you first present your thesis work, and second, you present the final document. The thesis presentation is an oral presentation of thesis work that is required for all students. It is maybe the only time over your program that we will require you to be at a given time, at a given place, or in Zoom to make a presentation. So really give this the top priority. The presentation is a very good opportunity to receive feedback, and it's a friendly environment. Don't be afraid of that, but it's a formal presentation in which we are expecting you to present results from your thesis. It takes place over the term in which the students will graduate, either typically the spring or the summer of their second year. So it's a good chance to get feedback. You have to get there with the job done or almost done, but you cannot, it has to be presented in past tense, what you did, not what you're going to do. And depending on your track and your committee, you may have like a short rehearsal of your thesis presentation that can be very helpful as well. Next slide, please. And well, after this presentation, you will have a period to wrap up your thesis document and present it in a format of a paper suitable for publication. So your final thesis looks like a paper for a journal. You have to observe the Department of Global Health guidelines. It can be a bit longer than a paper that you would send to publication because you can add some additional files, but not that long. Looks like a paper. It does not need to be submitted or published to serve as a thesis. It just needs to be formally approved in a signed format by your committee members to have the quality for graduation as a publishable product. Next slide. Something that Steve mentioned briefly, I mean, we strongly encourage all of you to publish your thesis work. So this is important to think ahead, and it is great because it may give you the visibility, increase the visibility of your work. The goal for all students should be the dissemination of their thesis results. So we encourage you to publish your thesis results. It's very important to talk about who's going to be the authors and co-authors of your thesis with your committee early in the process. Don't wait until the end. Co-authors in a publication usually include other people who made a meaningful scientific contribution to the work. So they can be committee members or there can be other people. So while publication usually has co-authors, the thesis must be authored only by the students. So it's very important to clarify from the beginning the authorships and publication plans with your committee members. Who are going to be the authors if this gets published? What is going to be the orders or the authors? Typically, the student goes as first author for the thesis paper, but it has to be clarified from the beginning that this will remain for the publication paper. Usually, the final thesis serves as a very good draft that has to be adapted for submission. So define a plan to prepare this draft and define a plan, a time for submission. Every day that passes after graduation, the probability of submission decreases. So if you plan to publish, try to do it just as close to your graduation as possible. Finish, celebrate, and a couple of days later, start moving on the publication before you get into other things. Next one. And well, this would be it on my side, pretty much describing the process of the elaboration of the thesis, starting by the definition of the topic, the confirmation of your committee, the elaboration of the IRB issues, the elaboration of your proposal, the elaboration of the thesis, your presentation, and your final document and the publication of this. We may have some time at the end for some questions. This is a lot of information together, so some questions may come out later. It's okay, we're starting the process and open to answer any questions. But let me pass now to Deepa, who can tell us a little bit about some timeline considerations. Deepa, please.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Bernardo. Nora, you can click through the animations. I didn't realize there were animations in there. I just want to, since we're, pressed for time, I just wanted to quickly just go over some tips around timeline considerations. When you form your thesis committee or capstone committee, these tips pertain to either the capstone or the thesis. It's a really good thing for you to discuss and communicate with your chair the timeline you have in mind for when you want to finish. Everyone has choices on which quarter they can finish. The vast majority of our MPH students graduate in the spring after being in 4 quarters in residence, and then sometimes a study abroad period in the summer. So 2 years of time working on MPH work in general. And on the next slide, which I don't want to get to yet, we have a sample timeline that's based on graduation in the spring. One way to begin thinking about your timeline and when you might have a final draft is to work backwards from the day that the thesis is due to the graduate school, which is the last day of finals week in the quarter that you'd like to graduate. And if you work backwards from there, consider that your thesis chair and your committee member may each serially want to have at least a week or two to read through and give you feedback. And you need to build in time to incorporate their feedback as well. And they may want to see more than one version of your thesis. Also keep in mind that whether you choose qualitative or quantitative methods, this can take more or less time based on the amount of time necessary to analyze data. Qualitative data, believe it or not, can take much, much longer to analyze. A sample kind of timeline for qualitative data analysis, it could take 2 months if you're collecting prospective data to recruit participants, to interview them, or to get them to come to focus groups. It could take an extra month to transcribe and translate the recordings of the qualitative data. It could take an additional month to code, depending on how much time you have devoted to it. And quantitative analyses could potentially take much less time if you survey and input the data into a database and the code involved. I have a few more tips here in terms of how long it might take to write each section of the thesis, and then you can go to the next slide, Nora. And then a sample timeline here on the next slide. just, you know, really thinking about summer and fall for collecting data, because winter quarter, the quarter before you want to graduate, you'll be completing analysis and beginning your write-up so that the quarter that you graduate, you finish kind of mid-quarter and start circulating drafts to your committee. Okay, so that's it. Other really quick tips are when you're thinking about ideas, networking in winter quarter of your first year is helpful. And also it's helpful to have a couple of different ideas in mind in case your first idea falls through, which often happens while we work in global health and during the pandemic. So always have kind of a backup idea. So Steve, I think you're next to finish us off.
Okay. I don't have explicit slides on the on what a capstone is. We have a nice capstone document on the intranet, which gives you a little bit of a sense of what a capstone is. But a couple of things I want to clarify. One is that it's new. This is the first year that we've had a capstone as a general option for any of our entering students. A couple of students from last year have, and actually the year before, have elected sort of post hoc to be able to do a competency, because that's when last year is when we approved it for the department. So we really don't have a lot of experience with capstones. It's not supposed to be a kind of dumbed down alternative to a thesis. I think that's what's really important. It should be at the same level of intellectual rigor, and the product should be just as rigorous and just as comprehensive as a thesis. And in fact, it may be in some ways more, because you're doing it, you know, and oftentimes in a more comprehensive way for an agency, whereas in a thesis, you're asking typically a narrower question. So don't think of it as just something that's easy to do or as a backup to a thesis. It's something you should plan beforehand. How do you find a capstone? Well, you find it through your interests, and particularly your interest in an agency. You can use your, the previous links you have, the previous agencies you've worked with, and they may have some major project that needs to be done that could be a capstone, whether it's a needs assessment or a program evaluation, or whether it's a sort of a background systematic review of the literature can actually be a good capstone. It would have to be systematic to be able to justify it being a capstone. The capstone can emanate from your practicum. That is, you can do a practicum which is focused on the experience, and then you can decide that in addition to the two products that you have, which are sort of little mini products that you do during your practicum, you can decide to do some major major activity that could ultimately become your capstone. And you can do it in Seattle, you can do it, in your home country, you can do it in Geneva, you can do it with all sorts of different kinds of organizations. So it's pretty broad. In a capstone, because it's not generalizable, most of the time you probably won't have the need to do an IRB, that is an ethical review, but every student is required to at least discuss the need for the ethical review with your capstone committee. So you're going to have a capstone chair, like you have a thesis chair, and one or more committee members. And you need to discuss the idea of, okay, if you're doing something that might involve human subjects, even if it's for a capstone and not for a generalizable research piece, you have to think about the implications for that. So absolutely talk about IRB. You may and probably will, in many cases, not need to pass it through officially, but a lot of times it's a good idea to pass it through anyway, just to get the experience of going through a review where the university human subjects team will say, hey, you don't need to have one, this is exempt. So that's basically what I want to say about the capstone. We're at 11:40 now. I do want to very quickly talk about the competencies for both the thesis and the capstone. Although, Andreas, were you going to be talking about this, or should I do this? I guess I should do it, unless Andreas, you want to.
You can go ahead for it. Thank you.
Okay, this is brand new as well. And you're the first class that is being required, and this is, again, a national requirement, so all MPH programs have to do this. You have to have 2 competencies for either a thesis or for a capstone. And the competencies are one of the 22 foundational competencies. And hopefully you've all seen those competencies, because those are the competencies that every public health student should be able to meet by the time they finish their public health degree, their MPH degree. And those of those 22 competencies, you can pick any one for the capstone or the thesis. And then we have a group of, I believe it's 5 competencies within the department. And those competencies, you just need to pick one. And it's not, not rocket science to do that. The competencies cover a huge array of issues, whether it's, understanding the burden of disease in a community, in your, whatever thesis or capstone you're doing, or whether it's understanding some of the drivers of those, or understanding how an agency works. All of those are part of the competency. So it's not very hard to do. The main thing to do is just to do it as you begin. Most faculty are not as aware of it as they're aware of other aspects of a thesis. So it's one of the things that you might bring up to the chair and members of your thesis or capstone. And I will stop there so that we can have plenty of time for questions.
Thank you, Stephen, Bernardo. Thank you, Andreas and Nora, for your coordination. And yeah, we did get one question in the chat Elena had, and I just quickly answered it about first-year faculty advising. Looks like we have another one. Oh no, we don't. Questions?
I don't see any other questions. If you'd like to either write in the chat box, or you could unmute yourself and ask the question as well.
I do think it may be important, Deepa, to mention what you said in your chat. The idea of the first-year advisor, because there's always this feeling that, gee, should I have my first-year advisor as my thesis or my capstone advisor?
Yeah. Yeah, I will verbally mention it. We pair you with your first-year advisors somewhat just by chance. The first year's advisor role is to help you navigate the program, help you navigate the institution, help you network. And then technically, once you've chosen a thesis topic and a chair, the advisor no longer really has a role with you. And it's your choice whether or not you would like to have that person serve as your thesis chair or be on your committee. So it's, you don't need to feel pressure to have that person serve on your committee. They can also, and I've seen this happen before with students, the first year advisor can also be your informal mentor, throughout your time in the program or even after you graduate. You might have made such a connection. Maybe they don't work in your content area, but you somehow, got along with them so well that you find them to be a professional informal mentor, and that's fine. So just to clarify, first year advisor doesn't, need to serve on your committee. But if it makes sense, then, yeah.
I would say it's in the neighborhood of about half of first-year advisors end up going to be a thesis advisor. And so as first-year advisors, all faculty know full well that it's quite likely, sometimes more likely than not, that the thesis will be chaired by somebody else. And the first-year advisor will not feel hurt, devastated, or whatever by not being selected as your thesis advisor or thesis chair.
There is another question Elena has. If we have some outcomes in practicum and during training in the summer, may this be a part of the thesis or capstone? Do you want to take that, Steve?
Sure. Both the thesis and the practicum should be activities that you're doing once you're in the MPH program. Okay, now for a practicum, for sure, I mean, you could end up doing a practicum, related to something you've done before. We highly encourage people to do practica that are outside of what they've done before. Okay, and that might relate to a capstone as well. So try to do something that kind of opens your mind to new things, and therefore just extending what you've done before you get into the program doesn't make a lot of sense. Having a thesis that's related to things that you've done before the program happens to maybe 10-20% of the folks in the program, where you might actually have come into the program with an idea or a study that was beginning, and then you might do the analysis of all that work once you're here. But my sense is, and Bernardo and Deepa, please chime in here. My sense is that we definitely want to encourage you to think of the work for the thesis is new work, even though you can do work on an old project. And when it's a capstone, it's likely to be brand new.
If Steve, I could just interject, and Elena can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's specifically asking more about if a practicum can grow into a capstone in a thesis. So not prior work to the MPH, but specifically building on your MPH practicum to do the capstone and thesis. I think that's what she's asking about.
Right. Okay. Well, that is absolutely a yes. That a practicum, again, is something that we encourage you to do that's different than what you've done before. And very frequently, the work in the practicum will sort of get you jazzed about one thing or another, and it could lead to either a generalizable piece of work that you would use for a thesis, or a specific piece of work for that organization that could be a capstone.
Thank you all for all of the great information so far. I was wondering if you had any advice or if you could advise. So yesterday there was an email sent out about potentially doing like a thesis or capstone in Uganda as part of a program. And I'm just curious how often on average you think those emails or opportunities come up, because I feel like I would be really interested in one of those, and I just want to make sure to keep an eye out for those emails.
Yeah, Caitlin, whenever opportunities for thesis, practicum, capstone come up and cross my email list, I always ask Nora to post to the blog. And Nora, would you like to talk a little bit about the blog? I think you mentioned it in workshop, but maybe so all the students know. But we also disseminate through the GH-MPH channels. I think that actually physically relocating abroad is, for a time period to do your thesis or practicum is kind of variable based on COVID. That's one thing I'll say, is that there were much more opportunities to do work and, actually leave the country and do work in another country pre-COVID than now. I think people are slowly, hesitantly kind of bringing that back. But Nora, did you want to talk about the blog at all?
I can talk about it briefly, and I think I did so at workshop, but Caitlin, I don't know where you saw that opportunity, but a lot of things that come our way, faculty and staff, I post on the blog, and under thesis or practicum. And so I think to answer your question, at this time we do get a lot of opportunities, but don't feel like you have to commit to it because you're scared you're not going to find another one. As you're seeing, there's a lot right now, and it will continue throughout the year. However, if you do see one that really aligns with what you'd like to do or an experience you'd like to have, I would say also look into it a little bit further and ask questions and let me know if there's no contact, and I can put you in contact with the folks so that you could see if this is something you want to pursue. But it is still really early, so I would hate for you to attach yourself to one thing and then find something later in the year. So, but continue to keep an eye out on the blog for opportunities.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
There's one timeline issue that is somewhat contradictory to what we're all telling you. and that's that because in the past, prior to COVID, we really encouraged students to do their thesis work overseas, or at some place where they could travel to. That a lot of people took advantage of travel grants, which the department has. And those travel grant applications are due, I don't remember the date, but it's usually late March or early April, something like that.
Usually in March.
Yeah, it's mid to late March. And so if you are thinking about something that you would do overseas, which I think we can now begin to imagine, again, in the COVID era, that you kind of have to get your act together a little, certainly before these travel grant applications are due, because you can't just sort of make up something the week before then. You have to sort of think about, by sometime in February, what some of the possibilities are, talk with a potential faculty supervisor. You could do both practica and thesis and capstones overseas, which we encourage you to do, and you can get travel grant for them. But they are due in late March.
And Alina had a question in the chat that I answered. I'll just briefly mention that the question is, do I need to physically come back to Seattle to graduate? And I asked Andreas for the clarification on this. You have to take, I believe, 2 credits the quarter you graduate. Am I right, Andreas?
So we encourage all students to take all the required courses in the first year. So you do have the flexibility in the second year to travel or be away, because if you travel or be away, especially if you're abroad, you can again do study abroad, and you can register for credits in that way and graduate remotely, right? Because the only thing that keeps you in Seattle are these physical courses that are happening in your first year. So let's say that in summer of 2022, you go back to, let's say, your home country and do some practicum, capstone, thesis work there, and you have no more coursework and you're pretty good on credits. As long as you just register for study abroad in your final quarter, you can graduate and you don't have to return to Seattle.
Yeah, we do the thesis presentations remotely in those cases.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions about studying abroad, just send me an email. I'm happy to talk through that process. I work with a lot of students on that process and the timeline, so happy to speak on that.
We do have a graduation ceremony here, which we hope this coming year will be in person. So that's a reason to be back here if you want to, but that is by no means required at all.
I also want to put in a plug for upcoming thesis presentations. So since we're on the conversation, if you'd like to see how a presentation is put together, presented, please join us on Tuesday, December 7th at 9 a.m. and we have 8 great presenters, and you'll be able to see how it unfolds and the 10-minute mark and all of those things. So you'll definitely get more emails from me, but Tuesday, December 7th will be a great opportunity for you to witness a presentation.
Nora, are those presentations that you're talking about specifically MPH? Because I've seen a few emails for like PhD level dissertations, and I just was curious.
Yeah, so the ones that I'm talking about are for the MPH, but it's no surprise that you're seeing PhD as well, because they're doing theirs as well. But I'm referring to the MPH ones specifically.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The MPH thesis presentations are generally much shorter than the dissertation defense that you see. I believe thesis presentations are about 10 minutes long, and defenses are it's more like an hour or two. So
I wanted to ask you if we have some trainings during our summer, kind of like scholarships, if we win something, would it be kind of credits in our schedule or not?
So if you have an opportunity in the summer, you're asking if you can get credit for it. I think there are ways to do it through independent study. If there is a faculty member that's willing to oversee the work, and you would take the independent study under that faculty member's name. So it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Sorry, another plug. And also, while we're on the conversation of thesis, we have alumni conversations, which is happening at 4 o'clock today. I reposted it on the blog. And this is also a great opportunity for you to ask our alums about how they found their thesis and you know, all of that jazz if you'd like. So it's at 4 o'clock today. Email me if you'd like the link to the Zoom, but it's on the blog as well. So ask our alums about their experience with it if you'd like.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And if I could just interject, I wanted to say, you know, just remember that for the MPH, the requirements that you have are the practicum and then capstone or thesis. And even though there's a lot of opportunities that you'll get through email with different, you know, internships, practical opportunities or research opportunities, the people who send those out don't necessarily speak our language of practicum, capstone, or thesis, but oftentimes those can fit to fulfill your requirement for the practicum, for your capstone and your thesis, as long as, you know, if you apply to that opportunity, or you have a separate conversation to say, if I get accepted, can I use this for my thesis, for example? So just so you know, there's always opportunities that can fit, but just not everyone speaks the same language. And then just a quick tip I wanted to say is to just add on to what Bernardo said earlier, which is as you're talking to different faculty members about projects and also about being on your committee, really just look at them as kind of conversations and informational interviews. I have a lot of experience with students who kind of meet with one faculty at a time because they're scared that one conversation is like this long dating commitment and they can't like deny or close that. They can't have a new conversation with a different member until they kind of close the loop with one person. So just really please shop around. You know, everyone's busy, and just to be clear, being clear is what's really important for everyone, you know. And then also, again, this is only what, 8 weeks or so of your first quarter. You've had practicum orientation with Janice, and you have this now. There's plenty of time. Folks are on different timelines. So in a month, if you hear 2 people having a thesis or a practicum, don't think that you're behind. You might still feel that way, but try to remember my voice as I'm saying this to you now, that you have a lot of time, and try not to compare yourself with other folks around you. There's plenty of folks out there who are on different timelines.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Andreas. And also, just having heard this presentation, you likely won't feel like you have all the answers. Things change from year to year. And if you have any questions, always know that we're here. You can send us an email, we being MPH program, faculty, staff, advisors. Just send us an email or stop by our offices if you have any questions, because it's not 100% clear. We try to put things down in manuals and on websites and communicate. But, you know, and if we have any questions ourselves, we will always double check for you and confirm. So please know that's what we're here for, is to help you navigate this process. So, okay, thanks again, everybody, for attending. Nora, did you just unmuted? Did you have anything?
No, I was going to say thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I will send out the link to this so that you could review it again whenever you would like.
Great.
Okay, great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Bye.